Hello everyone, this is Jabra again with more Old Testament, the book of Genesis, chapter 30 and 31 today in this segment, hopefully, in the interesting story of Jacob and his wives, the mothers of Israel. Now, I'm enjoying reading this part a lot because it's rich, it has lots of significance for things that are coming up in the scriptures. Lots of characters are coming into play. There is lots of complication, and sort of a book of Genesis kind of geek in a way. I just love this part of the Torah. So where we left in the last segment, we spoke about the four characters in the story so far. So five characters. So we have Jacob, the father of Israel. And we have Rachel, his beloved wife. Remember, his name is which is like a female sheep. We have Leah, whose name means wild cow, or someone who's wearied, who's in toil, who goes through hardship. Then there are two maids, two servants, two slaves. Zilpha, whose name means a drop, like a again, I said it means sort of like a tub that's filled with drops. And then Bilha, whose name is similar to the Arabic root Bilha, which means calamity and trouble. Now, these names are important in the story. And as I said earlier, biblical names always mean something relative to the story. Personally, I don't know if these are even the real names of the characters. Because remember, oral culture was the culture of storytelling in Israel and in the Near East. So for people to remember characters, for people to remember the story, this was sort of probably a mnemonic so that we can remember the stories and the meanings and the characters that come in. And as will be obvious in the names of the tribes of Israel. Now, personally, I have trouble memorizing the names of all the tribes, and every once in a while I memorize them and then I forget them. But the mnemonic in the story can help you if you like really focus on them. You can actually remember the names. And if you know the language, if you know biblical Hebrew or even Arabic, you can remember the names of the tribes of Israel real easy. So this is chapter 30. So chapter 30 is what we're doing now. Rachel remembers, has seen her sister, has been blessed with children. Her sister Leah is in pain because Jacob doesn't like her. And the degree to which he doesn't like her, the degree to which Jacob loves Rachel above all of his other wives and concubines will appear later in the story of Esau, and I'll talk about that when I address the story of him meeting Esau. But for now, Rachel comes in and she says to him, she first verse 1 it talks about her envying her sister. She's demanding from Jacob to give her children. Give me children or I will die. Give me children or I will die. And Jacob is angry at her and he says, am I God? Am I in the place of God? Am I the one who deprived you of the fruit of the womb? This is the literal translation. Am I the one who's preventing your pregnancy? So, wow. Now, this is not a way to talk to your wife who's having trouble having children. This is not nice. And on the other hand, Rachel should have understood that at some level, that especially knowing the story of Rebecca, knowing the story of Sarah, she should have known that this is sort of something that the Lord will bless her with, that this is in the hands of the Lord. And she is not even praying. Remember, Rebecca prayed to have a child. Rachel isn't praying. Rachel is going to Jacob asking for children from Jacob. And then she's saying, or I will die. I mean, that tells you, it makes me feel so sad just to read those lines. Now, this is the interesting thing because Jewish rabbis, when they talk about this, they say, how can Avinu Yaakov, our father Jacob, be so rude to his wife? And how can Rachel, Ima Rachel, be so not understanding and not pray and not ask, not ask Hashem, not ask God for children? And this is sort of like a little dilemma in Jewish literature. How can this scenario happen? Because they want in their mind, the biblical characters have to be perfect, and there is a reason. When they deviate from perfection, there has to be a reason for it. So the interpretation of the situation tickles me a little bit. It's very interesting because they say, remember the arc of the book of Genesis so far is that the Lord is with the oppressed, the Lord is with those who are suffering, the Lord is with those who are in trouble. And even in this story, the Lord is with Leah because Leah was hated, so the Lord is blessing her with children. So the logic that the Jewish interpreters, which I think is interesting, amusing, and actually deep, is that Jacob wants Rachel to be oppressed in a way, to feel that she is oppressed, to feel that she is hated, to be angry at her, so that the Lord will find compassion on her and give her children. This is how they interpret this part. So Jacob comes out smelling like a rose. He's wise. He's perfect. There is no problem there. And so the solution, of course, I spoke earlier about the Newsy tablets. This was a wife who, so a wife in the ancient Near East, again, a reminder, who couldn't have children could be returned to her father, and the husband can keep the dowry and can keep the money, and he can divorce her. But remember, Jacob loves Rachel. So in that culture, again, the Newsy tablets that were found in Iraq in the 20s show that this was a common practice. To have an heir, you can have a concubine or a slave. You can have a relationship with her and have children, and that child becomes the child of your wife and becomes one of your heirs. So she gives him Bilha. Now here is where Bilha's name comes into play, because her name, remember, means calamity and trouble. Now the person in calamity and trouble here is Rachel, because she's feeling the shame of not having children. She's feeling the pressure because her sister is having the children. So that's where Bilha, this is your first mnemonic. Rachel in trouble, in calamity, she gives Jacob Bilha, and Bilha basically gets a son, Rachel's first son. Again, I want to emphasize this point. When the Jews speak about the Imahot, the mothers, their mothers are Leah, Rachel, Sarah, and these are the mothers. And they don't mention Bilha, they don't mention Zilpha, because they are slaves. But really, those women are the mothers of Israel too. And we in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believe that we are modern Israel. Each one of us is adopted into one of the tribes of Israel. So you look at your tribe, you see which tribe you're from, and see who your mother is, your adopted mother in a way. So, and it's an interesting exercise. When we later talk about the blessing of Jacob to his sons, we'll see how the mothers and how much Jacob loved each one of them, or not, didn't love each one of them, affected the blessings. Anyway, so Rachel gets her first son, Dan, and Dan means judge, because she says, the Lord has judged for me and heard my voice and gave me a son. So remember, usually she could have called him Simeon like Leah did, but Leah already had that name, so she chose Dan because the Lord has judged for her. And then I call this the wives' children-bearing nuclear war, Cold War, or however you call it. A war ensues of having children. All of a sudden, we have all of these children. And Jacob again goes into Leah and into Bilha, and Bilha gets a second son, and and Rachel calls him Naphtali. Now, Fatala in Arabic and in its ancient Semitic root, which is also in ancient biblical Hebrew, Fatala means to twist or to turn to. So she says, because the Lord has turned to me, turned from my sister to me, and I had a son. She called him Naphtali. And Leah now, remember, she stopped having children, so what she resorts to the same thing, and she takes Zilpha, her maid, who's called a drop. She is the full tub because she's full of children, probably, and she gives her to Jacob. Now there was really no need for this because she already had children. Jacob didn't need heirs from her, but I think there is this war that ensued between the two sisters. So now Zilpha gets another son, and his name is Gad. Now the root of this is interesting because it's in Arabic Semitic. You say begad. Bijad means seriously, really, is the news true? So that's why she called him Gad. And then Zilpha gets another son, and she called him Ashir. Which Ashir is a root that means to point to. And Leah says, because women are pointing at me or are describing me in the Hebrew, in this translation that I use, the Sadia Gawan translation. So then there is this story. I mean, this is all about how the tribes came to be. So there is a story about mandrake, which was thought in that culture to be an aphrodisiac, and Rachel thinks that this aphrodisiac will work on Jacob, and it will help her conceive. So she basically allows Leah to have a night with Jacob for the mandrake. And I think Leah, that shows you how desperate Leah is to get to spend time with Jacob, to be with Jacob, to have his love. But the deal works, and she gets a son. Leah calls him Yesakar, and that root Sakara means to have someone work for hire. So that's where the name comes from. And then she again conceives six sons for Jacob, and she says, this time I've given him 6 boys. 6 boys is a lot for a Near Eastern man, having 6 boys who will support you, who will work for you, who will support you in your old age. That's a huge deal. She said, this time he will live with me, he will come be with me, and that's why she called him Zebulon. And then notice how the scriptures here deprive her from getting 7 boys. Remember, 7 is the sacred number. And the 7th is Dinah. And Dinah is her, just the scriptures say, she bore him a daughter, she called her Dinah. And that's it. The birth of Dinah isn't a happy thing, and later on we'll see that Jacob actually didn't really like Dinah that much, or Dinah, and yeah, and that's where those Leah's pregnancies ends. And then the Lord remembers Rachel, and she gets her own child. So after all of this humiliation, in a way, from Leah wins the war by points. If that birth war, child war is in points, Leah wins it hands down. But Rachel finally, after all of her humiliation, she gets Joseph. Now, the name Joseph is so fascinating to me, so poetic, and this one word describes Rachel's situation. Because Yosef can be Yasif, which is similar to the Arabic Yadif, which means to add, but it's also related to another root in Semitic languages, specifically Arabic, wasafa, which means to take away. So you have Yusuf here, she says, he added to me another son. Rachel says he added to me, but he has also taken away my my shame. So there is this double meaning here. Taken away my shame. So taken away, added to me, but then also the root, and this is sort of me now. When I was repeating the name today and saying Yusuf, Yusuf, it sounds like Asaf in Arabic, which is sorrow, which sort of describes her sorrow and her past sorrow. So it is a brilliant name, and as we know, Joseph is a key character in what's to come. He is the savior of Israel, and we'll talk about that when we come to Joseph. He's one of my favorite biblical characters. Really, a truly, we've had all of these flawed characters so far, but Joseph is going to be the first righteous, fully committed character in the book of Genesis. He's without blemish in a way to me. Maybe when I reread it for these segments, I'll discover something I didn't discover about Joseph before. But Joseph is an amazing character in the Bible, and that's where we the tribes are complete. Benjamin is still to come. We'll talk about him when he comes in. But Jacob now wants to leave Laban, and that's where we have the next story, which is the story of Laban and Jacob and how Jacob built his wealth. Because remember, so far he's been worked for Laban for free for all the wives and all the children, and so he hasn't had much. So next is the business deal, and there is another conflict that the Jewish rabbis have when they read the story, and I'll talk about how they resolve that conflict in the next segment. Thank you for listening.